My husband swore he never left our kids alone until the doorbell camera exposed his shocking secret. I remember the moment I first met my husband, Andrew, at a mutual friend's barbecue 12 years ago. He was standing by the grill, spatula in hand, cracking jokes with an easy confidence that floated through the summer air. His dark hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail back then, and he had on a worn band t-shirt and cargo shorts. He radiated a carefree magnetism that I found irresistible, even though I was only in my early 20s and just figuring out who I was. Something about his smile made me feel safe. He had a way of looking right at me that made me feel interesting, like my every word mattered to him. We started talking that evening, him flipping burgers and me sipping on iced tea, and it felt like I'd known him for a lifetime. At the time, I could never have predicted the magnitude of heartbreak and rage I'm experiencing now. Sometimes I look back and wonder if I missed signs back then, if there was an early red flag I chose to ignore. Perhaps I was blinded by infatuation or too enamored with the idea of a stable, older partner, someone who had his life together while I was still fumbling around, fresh out of college, living with 3 roommates in a cramped apartment. Andrew was 12 years older than me, but the gap didn't worry me at first. He seemed more mature, more certain of who he was. It felt like a gift to be with someone who could take care of me and who might already have some of life's details figured out. In retrospect, take care is too generous a term. Andrew's maturity sometimes cloaked controlling tendencies and manipulative tactics that I was too naive to see for what they were, major red flags. Even so, our relationship progressed quickly. We got engaged after a year and a half of dating, and we were married shortly thereafter. The wedding was small, a few friends and family members in the backyard of his parents' summer cottage by a lake. I remember him standing at the makeshift altar wearing a light gray suit, beaming as he took my hand. In that moment, I felt so sure of the future. I felt safe, secure, and convinced I was stepping into a life of love and trust. Fast forward 7 years of marriage and 2 children, a 5-year-old son, Lucas, and our 9-month-old baby girl, Anna. Our home is a modest 2-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. We have a swimming pool in the backyard, which Andrew insisted on installing a few years ago so we could host barbecues and parties. Life sometimes felt chaotic with 2 kids, especially as Anna is still in diapers and up several times in the night, but I tried to maintain a sense of calm. While not perfect, no marriage truly is, our life felt stable enough from the outside, but inside me there had been a growing sense of unease, a flicker of suspicion at the back of my mind, for almost a year. It wasn't any one thing that first made me suspect Andrew was hiding something. It was a series of small incidents, phone calls he took in the garage, unexplained late-night texts, an extra shower in the middle of the day when he came home from running errands. Each time I asked him about these odd behaviors, he gave me the same dismissive response: "You're overreacting," or "That's crazy talk," or "I'm insulted you even think that." I let him brush off my questions because, frankly, I had neither the energy nor the evidence to push further. I work part-time and also volunteer on the board of directors for a local nonprofit, work that's quite time-consuming, especially when we have events. Between my responsibilities as a mother and my volunteer commitments, I had little left to devote to policing my husband. Besides, I wanted to trust him. I wanted to believe the father of my children was being honest. But all of that changed last weekend. It started out like any ordinary Saturday. I was out of the house for most of the day for a special event the nonprofit was putting on, a fundraiser at a local community center. It was the kind of event that required my full attention, which meant Andrew was on parenting duty. He knows how vital this volunteer work is to me, how I'm trying to carve out my own sense of identity beyond just Mom. My phone was in my purse most of the time, so we exchanged only a few scattered texts in the morning. Everything seemed fine. He responded politely, telling me the kids were all good. It wasn't until midday, around lunchtime, that I tried to call him. The call went straight to voicemail. I assumed he was busy with the kids or in the shower. Still, no big deal. Sometimes he's not the best about picking up. Half an hour later, my phone rang and I saw it was my mom. I pictured her in her own living room, crocheting or flipping through the channels. So I answered, expecting a routine chat. Instead, she sounded anxious. "Hey, sweetie," she said. "Lucas just called me." "Really?" I answered, smile forming on my face at the thought of my 5-year-old calling grandma for a midday chat. "That's adorable. Did he want to show you something?" "Not exactly," she said, hesitation creeping into her voice. "He said he and Anna were watching TV. When I asked where Andrew was, Lucas said Andrew wasn't there." I felt an odd heaviness in the pit of my stomach, but I tried to keep calm. Maybe Andrew was napping upstairs, or maybe he had stepped outside. "He told you he's alone?" "Yes," Mom replied. "He didn't sound scared. He just sounded normal, like he didn't think anything of it. So I asked him to walk around and check for Daddy, and he said he couldn't find Andrew anywhere in the house." My heart leapt. "You're sure he said Andrew's not there?" She confirmed it. It took me several tries to speak again. A swirl of fear, anger, and confusion erupted inside me. Mom, okay, I'll handle this. I'm leaving right now. I barely remember the next few minutes, thanking my colleagues, grabbing my coat, rushing out of the event in a flurry of apologies and half-explanations. My hands trembled as I unlocked my car. While I was driving, I started calling Andrew repeatedly. No answer. Texted him frantically. Nothing. It was the longest 10-minute drive of my life. My mind raced with questions. Where could he be? Did he run out to grab groceries? But he wouldn't just abandon the kids without even telling me. Would he? At last, mid-drive, my phone buzzed. It was Andrew calling. Hey, what's going on? He asked nonchalantly, as though I were the one who needed an explanation. Where are you? I demanded, adrenaline sending my voice into near hysteria. He paused. Then, at home. My jaw clenched. Lucas just called my mom. He said you were gone. Andrew didn't even falter. He repeated calm. I've been here the whole time. I have no idea why he'd say that. I could feel my blood pressure spike. So he's lying. He let out an exasperated sigh. He must be confused, or maybe he just couldn't find me. I was doing laundry in the basement. The casual tone in his voice was like nails on a chalkboard. I told him I was too upset to keep speaking while driving. My mind swam with images of my children left alone in the house, Anna crawling around, Lucas flipping channels on the TV. What if something had happened to Anna? What if she fell? Or if something got stuck in her mouth? Those anxious thoughts surged through me, but I tried to remain focused enough to drive. I felt tears welling up but blinked them back, determined to get home swiftly and safely. When I finally arrived, I parked crookedly in the driveway, leaving the car door open in my haste. Rushing inside, I found Lucas and Anna on the couch, the TV playing some cartoon, both of them fine, thank God. My son's eyes lit up when he saw me. Mommy, look at this funny dog. He pointed to the screen. He seemed far too relaxed for what I'd just been imagining. I scooped up Anna, who gave me a gummy smile. Relief washed through me, but it was tinged with hot anger that I could barely contain. Andrew walked in from the kitchen. See? He said, gesturing to the kids with a flourish. Everything's fine. You're blowing this out of proportion. I was seething. Lucas told my mom you weren't here, I repeated, keeping my voice as steady as possible. He walked all over the house and didn't see you. Where were you that he couldn't find you? Andrew shrugged, leaning against the doorway. I was in the basement. Like I said, I marched downstairs. There were no clothes spinning, no piles folded. In the dryer, I recognized the same load I'd started the night before. It smelled stale, obviously untouched. I turned to face him, arms crossed. This is the same load from yesterday, still damp. You weren't doing laundry, Andrew. He refused to bud. All right, so I didn't actually turn it on yet. I was sorting. He might have come down before I got there, or maybe he just didn't see me. Who knows? He's 5. Kids get confused. I tried to keep my voice level as I led him back upstairs. The kids were still focused on the television, so I quietly pressed him. Stop lying to me. You left our children alone, didn't you? His eyes narrowed. No, I didn't. You're the one acting crazy about this. I just told you where I was. I felt a wave of dizzying frustration. How could he stand there so calmly, spouting such an obvious falsehood, and accusing me of overreacting? My thoughts spilled together in a blur of rage and hurt. I pictured the worst-case scenario if something had happened to Anna, her choking, Lucas not knowing what to do, or an accident if either child decided to wander outside. The possibilities were horrifying. At that moment, I decided I had to leave the house to calm down. I couldn't scream in front of the kids, so I went outside to my car, slammed the driver's seat door shut, and let loose a scream of pure fury. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I gripped the steering wheel. I was humiliated, enraged, and worst of all, convinced there was more to this. Over the past few months, my suspicions of him sneaking around had increased, but I never thought he'd stoop so low as to leave the kids alone or be so brazen as to lie when confronted. A few minutes later, I dabbed my eyes and forced myself to return inside, determined not to cry in front of the children. Andrew was sitting on the couch, flicking through channels with the remote, his face a mask of absolute normalcy. It was as though nothing had happened, as though my meltdown in the car was in a separate dimension. He looked up at me. I hope you're done with your freakout, he said, in a cool, dismissive tone that made me want to throw something. I bit my tongue, not wanting to fight in front of Lucas and Anna. Instead, I gathered my bearings and tried to keep the rest of the day as normal as possible for the kids. We had dinner and put the children to bed later in the evening. But once they were tucked away, I unleashed my questions on Andrew with renewed intensity. He refused to concede an inch. I didn't leave, he insisted. You're making a big deal out of your son's overactive imagination. Don't call me a liar. I won't stand. What could I do? With no cameras inside our house, no neighbors' ring footage that I'd yet asked for, I had no definitive proof. All I had was the word of a 5-year-old who might, in Andrew's telling, have simply not noticed that Daddy was in the basement or outside. But I knew, deep in my gut, he was lying. Over the next few days, the arguments multiplied. We circled the same points again and again. I couldn't let it go, and I didn't want to. Yes, I realize sometimes you have to pick your battles in a marriage, but leaving kids alone is absolutely a hill I'm prepared to die on. And the lying, the open disregard for my rage and fear was beyond maddening. One night, I pressed him to hand over his phone so I could check his location history. I hate even describing it that way because it sounds so controlling, but the circumstances demanded clarity. He refused outright. "I'm not giving in to your delusions," he said. "I won't be treated like a prisoner in my own home." I told him, "If you were home, prove it, so I can put my mind at ease and we can move on. Why won't you do that for me? Why would you want me to live in this state of suspicion?" He just scoffed, crossing his arms defensively. "You're losing it," he snapped. "You need help?" That night, I barely slept. My mind spun with the memory of how, on my wedding day, he gazed at me so lovingly. How had we fallen so far that we'd landed in a place where I had to beg to see his phone to confirm he wasn't leaving our kids alone? Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Lucas's innocent face telling my mom, "Daddy's not here." I'd also recall Anna's baby monitor going dark if no one was in the house. My nerves were shot. My heart pounded ceaselessly in my chest. I felt a growing anger not just for Andrew, but for the helplessness of my situation. A few days after the incident, the tension in our house was electric. Andrew refused to budge from his stance that I was overreacting, refused to answer follow-up questions, refused to show me anything on his phone, and each day he acted more and more dismissive. He even seemed to enjoy the power dynamic, me suspecting, him denying, me raging, him ignoring, like a game. His behavior stoked my fury, but it also triggered a deep sadness. How could I have married someone who would treat me with so little empathy? Finally, I snapped. I looked him in the eye and said, "If you weren't gone, then you won't mind if I ask our neighbor for the ring footage for that day." We live on a street where a few neighbors have ring cameras pointed out onto their driveways and a portion of the street. The older couple directly next door had mentioned once that their ring camera picks up a wide swath of the block, including part of our driveway. Andrew's eyes flashed with something akin to panic, but he quickly masked it with bravado. "Go ahead. Go humiliate yourself," he said, feigning confidence. "You really want to show them how paranoid you are? They'll think you're insane." Something about the way he said it, like I'd be the one humiliated, turned my anger into a savage determination. "Fine," I said. I yanked open the front door and marched outside. He must have seen in my face that I wasn't bluffing. He rushed after me, following me down the driveway, telling me to stop, that it was crazy to involve the neighbors. I turned to him with trembling hands. "If you care so much, let me see your phone. Otherwise, I'm going over there. Enough games." He grimaced, still refusing to produce the phone. "Do what you want," he spat. I did precisely that. Even though I'd barely exchanged words with that neighbor in the past, a polite wave here or there, and though my adrenaline was spiking, my anger fueled. I rang their doorbell, explained I had an urgent issue, and asked if they could possibly review their ring footage from Saturday. They looked at me kindly and invited me in. Andrew loitered near the sidewalk, presumably hoping I'd stop. The neighbors said they'd be happy to help, but it might take them a little while to dig out the relevant files. They seemed concerned, especially when they saw me trembling with a mix of anger and embarrassment. I gave them my phone number so they could text me the clips once they found them. When I left their porch, Andrew stood there waiting. His expression was unreadable. "You're going to regret getting them involved," he muttered. I quietly told him, "I regret that you forced my hand. I regret trusting you." We headed inside. I tried to keep the kids busy with coloring books and snacks, my hands shaking as I poured juice for Lucas. On the outside, it must have looked surreal. A quiet suburban home, mother handing her child a cup of juice, father standing stiffly in the corner. But on the inside, the tension was as thick as a thundercloud about to burst. A couple of hours passed in anxious silence. Andrew mostly stayed in the other room, flipping channels, sometimes stepping outside to take calls. Yet another red flag. I kept anticipating the ping of a text from my neighbor. My thoughts raced in circles. Would the ring footage show Andrew leaving and returning? Or would it show nothing at all, in which case I'd be back at square one, forced to rely on the word of a 5-year-old? At last, my phone chimed, and I saw a message from a number I didn't recognize. "Hi, this is Jeff, your neighbor. I'm sending you the ring footage from Saturday. Let me know if this helps." My heart hammered. I excused myself to the upstairs bedroom, locked the door, and opened the clip. The footage was a wide-angle shot of our street and part of our driveway. The date stamp showed Saturday. For a few seconds, the street was empty. Then, I saw a car slowly pull into our driveway, a small blue compact car that I didn't recognize at all. My breath caught in my throat. A woman, blonde, wearing a cardigan and jeans, stepped out of the driver's side. She glanced up toward our neighbor's house for a moment, then walked along the side of our garage. In the ring camera's view, she disappeared from sight the moment she rounded the corner, presumably heading toward our backyard gate or the side door that leads to our basement. The clip recorded her car being there for 23 minutes. I watched it once, then again stunned. Toward the end of the footage, she re-emerged, got into the car, and backed out of the driveway. The timestamp lined up almost exactly with the frantic phone call I had made to Andrew when I left the event. She was there the same window of time Andrew insisted he was downstairs doing laundry. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my phone. So, Andrew had lied. But the bigger betrayal was that he'd had another woman at our home, and even more sickening, he had done so while our 2 children were in the house, unsupervised. I now suspected that he hadn't literally left the property, but he had certainly left them alone inside, out of earshot. If they needed him, or if something happened, he would have had no idea. Tears stung my eyes. I felt a mix of confusion, heartbreak, fury, and a strange clarity. I finally had proof. This was not about me being paranoid. This was reality. My husband had a secret visitor, and he lied about it. And from the moment I saw that footage, an ominous new thought haunted me. This was not the first time. I marched downstairs, confronted him with the footage. At first, he actually looked relieved because the footage showed that the car arrived, but not necessarily that he left the property. So he latched onto that. "You see," he said, crossing his arms. "I never left. I was just in the back. So you owe me an apology." I stared at him, mouth agape. "You owe it me an explanation," I managed to say, spitting each word with white-hot fury. "You had a woman over when the kids were alone inside. Where were you?" He shrugged with maddening composure. "I was in the backyard. She's just a friend." I felt my blood boil. "A friend you didn't tell me about? A friend who shows up out of nowhere for 23 minutes while you can't hear the kids? A friend you apparently needed to hide? I'm sorry, Andrew, but I don't buy it." He actually had the gall to act offended. "It's none of your business. I didn't do anything wrong." The kids weren't in danger. Lucas is 5, not an infant. Anna was sleeping, or maybe in her bouncer, whatever. Nothing happened. I nearly screamed. "You left a 5-year-old and a 9-month-old unattended while you were hooking up in the backyard with some random woman. Are you out of your mind?" It was one of those raw, unfiltered moments where your body reacts before your mind can properly process. My hands were shaking, my pulse roaring in my ears. I couldn't believe the lengths he would go to deny or downplay this. Not only was he stepping out on me, but he was putting our kids in danger to do it. He stiffened. "Lower your voice. I didn't do anything like that. She's an old friend who dropped something off, that's it, and I'm getting sick of your accusations. You're crazy." I was beyond done with his dismissals. "If it was so innocent, why did you lie about it?" He rolled his eyes. "I know how you get. Paranoid. Controlling. You'd blow any woman at this house out of proportion. So I just didn't mention it." At that moment, my heartbreak ballooned into something uglier. I wanted so badly for him to just break down and admit the truth. I wanted him to apologize, to show remorse, to say, "I messed up, I'm sorry, I don't know what I was thinking." But he didn't. He just deflected blame back to me. That was the moment I realized I was no longer looking at the man I thought I had married. I was staring at a stranger. I spent the next few hours in a haze. He tried to go about the day like nothing unusual had happened. He even asked if I wanted to go grocery shopping with him, or if I felt like ordering pizza. The nerve of this man. To pretend we're a happy couple just going about our weekend. I told him to leave me alone. He gave a melodramatic sigh and retreated to the backyard. Ironically enough, probably to make phone calls to whoever that woman was. That evening, after we put Lucas and Anna to bed, I confronted him again. I needed clarity. Who was she? How long has this been happening? Has he done this before while watching the kids alone? But when I asked, he showed no contrition at all. Instead, he tried to pin the blame for the entire fiasco on me. He said I'd lost my mind over nothing, that the kids were safe. No mention of the fact that he'd physically cornered me that afternoon, trying to stop me from going to the neighbor. No mention of how he tried to gaslight me about never leaving the house, when the real concern was that he'd left the kids alone inside while he was hooking up or canoodling with another woman out of earshot. Throughout this confrontation, he said chilling things like, "I don't have to justify anything to you," and "You're the reason this marriage is falling apart. Your paranoia." I felt like something in my chest tore open. Pain radiated from my heart. I had given this man over a decade of my life, my youth, my trust, children, and I couldn't recognize him. He was cold, unfeeling, and so brazen about what he'd done. When I got emotional, tears streaming down my face, he just stared at me with something bordering on contempt. In my desperation, I found myself simultaneously wanting him to vanish and wanting him to hold me, to comfort me. That paradox was the cruelest realization. I still loved the memory of the man I thought he was. But the man standing in front of me was someone new, someone vicious and manipulative. That night, I called my mom in tears. It was nearly midnight, but she answered. I told her everything. The ring footage, the blonde woman, Andrew's refusal to come clean, the kids being left alone. Her voice trembled with anger. She asked if I was safe, if the children were safe. I said yes, though deep down I felt none of us truly were. This situation had destroyed any sense of security I had. Mom said I could always come stay with her, to which I softly replied that I wasn't ready to uproot the kids yet. Plus, she lived a few hours away. I didn't want Lucas to be yanked out of school with no plan. We decided I would consult a lawyer first to understand my options for custody and the best path. The next morning, I expected Andrew to wake up sullen or at least somewhat apologetic. Instead, he acted like it was a typical Sunday. He picked up Anna from her crib, gave me a passing good morning, and then announced he was ordering bagels from our favorite breakfast joint. He asked me if I wanted to try a new chili recipe for dinner, like he hadn't detonated a bomb in our lives. The dissonance was so strong it gave me a headache. There I was, a battered, emotional wreck, while he was cheerfully browsing the takeout menu, inquiring whether I preferred plain or everything bagels. I wanted to shake him. In some bizarre way, the normalcy of his tone was even more infuriating than if he were yelling. He was treating me like an annoying inconvenience, or as though I had the memory of a goldfish and couldn't recall the massive fight we'd had mere hours ago. I told him in a hollow voice, "I'm not hungry." I turned away. I think he rolled his eyes or shrugged, some gesture to convey that he had already moved on. The children, of course, were oblivious to the drama. Lucas wanted to go to the park. Anna was babbling in her high chair. My heart bled. They deserved better than a father who would hide in the backyard with another woman and a mother who was falling apart with anxiety and rage. I resolved that no matter what happened between me and Andrew, I'd protect them fiercely. I wouldn't let him endanger them again. That afternoon, I took a long walk with the kids while Andrew stayed home. I didn't trust him not to have that woman over again if I left them there, so I insisted on taking them along. I needed space to think, to process. The chill of the autumn air prickled my cheeks as I pushed Anna's stroller, with Lucas scampering ahead, excitedly pointing at fallen leaves. My mind whirred with plans. Did I have enough saved up to leave him? Where would I go? Could I stay with my best friend for a short time? Who could help me watch the kids if I had to work? Would I end up in a custody battle? Could I handle a separation right now when Anna was still nursing? Those thoughts felt heavier than the crisp wind swirling around me. But I had to face them. I couldn't just pretend everything was fine. Andrew clearly planned to do exactly that, but I couldn't. I knew I had to do something. That evening, once the kids were in bed, Andrew turned on the TV and acted like we were going to hang out. I stared at him, astonished by his nonchalance. "You can't just ignore what happened," I said quietly, though my anger was still simmering. He smirked. "I can do whatever I want. I don't owe you any more explanations. I told you everything you need to know. Nothing happened, the kids were safe, end of story. If you keep harping on it, that's your problem." My breath caught in my throat. In that moment, I felt a surge of steely resolve. "Not for much longer," I muttered, not caring if he heard. I went upstairs and shut myself in the guest room. Then I dialed a lawyer's office number that I'd found through an online mother's support forum. It was late, so I had to leave a voicemail, but it felt like a major step just to say, "Hi, my name is," and I need help figuring out how to proceed with the divorce and custody issues. The next few days passed in a blur of tension. Andrew occasionally tried to talk to me about random everyday issues. Bills, grocery lists, the laundry. Each time, I felt that wave of nausea, as if I were talking to a stranger wearing my husband's face. He no longer was the man I married. He was a cunning, manipulative presence who displayed zero remorse. Even more concerning, he continued to gaslight me about the seriousness of leaving the kids alone. One night, he actually said, "It's not illegal to let a 5-year-old watch TV while you're in the backyard. There's no law about that." I told him that's not the point. The point is that you are so far away and out of earshot that if anything happened to the kids, you wouldn't even know until it was too late. The point is that you lied. You risked their safety for your own selfish agenda. But I didn't even waste my breath going into detail, because deep down, I knew he didn't care about my view. Meanwhile, I received a call back from the lawyer, who was kind and patiently listened to the entire situation. She explained how custody typically works in our state, how child support is calculated, and how to go about filing for separation or divorce. She also explained that if I could document Andrew's unsafe behavior, like leaving the kids alone, this could be relevant to custody. It didn't guarantee I'd get full custody, but it could factor into the judge's decision. She advised me to gather what evidence I could, keep a journal of suspicious incidents or times he left the children unattended, and ensure that I had a place to go if things escalate. I spent another 2 days in deep turmoil, wanting so badly for Andrew to break down, apologize, promise never to do it again, maybe even offer to go to marriage counseling. Something. But as I watched him, he seemed entirely unconcerned. more annoyed at me for refusing to just drop it. He continued acting like everything was normal, going about his daily routines, occasionally stepping outside for phone calls he wouldn't explain. On the fifth day after discovering the ring footage, I made a decision. I sat him down after dinner and said, as calmly as I could, "This isn't working. I'm not going to keep living like this, with you lying and ignoring me while endangering our kids." He stared at me, a cold smirk on his lips. "So what, you're leaving?" he asked mockingly. "I'm starting the process," I said, voice trembling a bit. "If you won't admit what happened, if you won't show me you can be trusted, I see no way for us to stay married." He spread his hands theatrically. "Do whatever you want," he said. "You're on your own." I nodded, tears brimming in my eyes. "I know," I whispered, stepping away. That night, I told Lucas we were going to visit Grandma for a while. He asked if Daddy was coming, and I tried not to cry as I said, "Not right now, honey." Anna was too young to understand any of it, but just seeing her sweet baby grin reminded me that I had to do the right thing to protect them, even if it tore my heart in two. The next day, I quietly packed some essentials. Andrew barely paid attention, or if he did, he didn't show it. Once I had my suitcase ready, I buckled the kids in the car. With a final glance back at the house, I saw Andrew standing on the porch, arms crossed, an almost bored look on his face. My gut churned. This was the man I'd once adored. Now he looked at me as though I were a stranger. On the drive to my mom's, I called the lawyer again and arranged for an in-person appointment. I was determined to handle this properly, to ensure my children's well-being above all. My hands shook on the steering wheel, but every mile that passed under the tires felt like a step away from darkness and confusion, and a step toward clarity. When I arrived, my mom enveloped me in a fierce hug while Lucas clung to my leg. She let me vent, let me cry. Over the next few days, we started sorting through the logistics of me staying there indefinitely. Meanwhile, Andrew sent a handful of texts, mostly about meaningless details like whether the electricity bill was paid. Not once did he ask to speak with Lucas or Anna, nor did he apologize. It solidified for me how emotionally disconnected he'd become. In the following weeks, I made arrangements to formally file for divorce. Through my lawyer, I also requested a temporary custody arrangement that would ensure the kids were never left solely in Andrew's care until he could prove he was capable and responsible. He got wind of it, of course. He sent me a barrage of angry texts, accusing me of being vindictive and trying to keep the kids from him. He threatened to take everything. But I had documentation of the ring foot, of him physically blocking me from leaving the house to talk to the neighbors, and a record of the times he'd left them alone by my own recollections, plus my mother's statement about Lucas calling, saying Andrew was gone. While it's not ironclad proof of every wrongdoing, it's enough to paint a picture of irresponsibility and neglect. At one point, Andrew tried to backtrack, claiming we could work it out if I just stopped with the drama. I asked him for a heartfelt apology, for full disclosure of who that woman was and how many times he'd brought her over. He refused to give me anything but half-lies and deflections. He wouldn't even confirm her identity. So I continued moving. Eventually, I discovered, through an acquaintance of his from work, that the blonde woman was a co-worker. They had apparently been seeing each other on and off for the last few months. That stung. Not that it was surprising, but it was a final nail in the coffin of any lingering hope I had that he'd come clean. The fact that he'd bring her over while our children were inside was a new low I never could have imagined. In my moments of reflection, I found myself grieving the marriage that I thought I had, the man I believed Andrew was. But every time the grief threatened to paralyze me, I remembered Lucas's little voice on the phone to Grandma. Dad's not here. I remembered Anna's innocent baby coos. I remembered the ring footage of that woman creeping around my property. I remembered Andrew's smug dismissals and utter lack of remorse. That was all the motivation I needed to keep going. It's been a whirlwind since then. I wish I could say divorcing Andrew was simple, but nothing about the dissolution of a family is easy. There's heartbreak, logistical nightmares, custody battles. But as I write this, the immediate future looks something like this. I'm staying with my mom while my lawyer finalizes paperwork for a formal separation. Andrew has visitation rights to see Lucas and Anna, but only supervised by a third party for now. At least until a custody hearing decides otherwise. I'm sure he's furious, but that's not my concern anymore. I've started therapy to help me cope with the betrayal and the emotional whiplash. It's a lifeline in these tumultuous times. Lucas is in a new school near my mother's house, though I'm trying to maintain as much consistency as possible for him. It's hard to explain all this to a 5-year-old, but I do my best to reassure him he's loved and safe. Looking back, I realize I was desperate for Andrew to admit the truth because I equated that with validation that I wasn't crazy. But I see now that I don't need his admission. I have the truth in the form of ring camera footage, in the form of my son's phone call to Grandma, in the form of Andrew's callous denial of everything. I have more than enough clarity. That clarity is enough to free me, to help me move forward. It's not the life I wanted, but I believe it's ultimately better for me And, most importantly, for my kids. I refuse to let them be raised in a home where their father prioritizes clandestine affairs over their safety and belittles their mother for daring to seek the truth. As for Andrew, perhaps he'll realize someday what he lost, or perhaps he'll continue in denial for the rest of his life. If he ever becomes a better man for the sake of our children, I won't stand in his way. But my priority is protecting Lucas and Anna and ensuring they grow up without the weight of their father's dishonesty and negligence bearing down on them. In my quieter moments after the kids are asleep, I still mourn the illusion of the marriage I thought we had. But I'm determined to build a new life, a stable, loving environment for my children. And though it feels daunting, I'm strangely hopeful. I found a community of supportive friends, found an inner strength I never knew I had, and I'm looking to a future where I'm no longer gaslit and demeaned by someone who claimed to love me. So that's where things stand. It's a process, and I'm sure there are more challenges ahead. But I hold on to a single phrase that my mom told me when I first arrived, eyes swollen from sobbing, heartbroken. She said, "Sometimes the hardest truth to face is the one that sets you free." And I feel freer now, exhausted. Yes, bruised by betrayal, yes, but free to create the life my children and I deserve. Free from the endless cycle of suspicion and denial. Free from the heartbreak of trying to love someone who refuses to love me, or even our kids. Enough to be honest. The final conclusion is not a triumphant parade, but it's a resolution nonetheless. Andrew and I are in the early stages of a divorce, with custody agreements set to be hashed out in the coming months. He no longer denies what happened when faced with legal accountability, although he still downplays it, tries to cast blame on me, and refuses to fully admit his affair. My heartbreak hasn't magically disappeared, but step by step, I'm finding some measure of healing. I will never forget how I felt that day, rushing home, terrified, only to discover a web of lies that extended far beyond leaving the kids alone. But that day also revealed to me something invaluable. Andrew's true character. I can't unsee it, and I won't bury it again for the sake of a marriage built on quicksand. Whatever happens, I know I've done the right thing by protecting my children and myself. And as painful as it is, it's better to confront that painful truth than to endure a lifetime of secrets and dismissal. I deserve honesty. My children deserve safety and love. And together, we are forging a new path, one without Andrew's lies. The story ends with me stepping into the unknown, but it's no longer a dark unknown. It's one illuminated by the unshakable certainty that I deserve better, and my children do too. The heartbreak is part of the process, yet hope is on the horizon. And that, in the end, is a conclusion far better than the endless, torturous loop of deception and denial that had been my life just days before. I'm closing this chapter with the knowledge that, yes, Andrew and I have parted ways as husband and wife. It's not what I ever wanted, but it's the only path that makes sense now. My children will grow up with one parent who is fiercely protective of them, unwavering in her devotion, and forging ahead with honesty. That is my comfort. That is my strength. That is the reality I choose.